I wasn't even supposed to go to the grocery store that night. The rain was coming down hard, making the drive miserable. But I had to pick up a few things for dinner, and I was already running late. You know that feeling when you just want to get in and out as fast as possible? That was me. I just wanted to grab my stuff and go home. But of course, things never go that smoothly. As soon as I walked through the automatic doors, I felt an odd chill. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was something else. Something that felt off. I shook it off and grabbed a basket, heading straight for the produce section. The sound of squeaky carts and the quiet hum of the store's fluorescent lights filled the space. But I felt strangely alone, like I was the only one there, even though I could see other shoppers moving through the aisles. I reached for some apples when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, miss?" I turned around, smiling politely like you do when a stranger asks for help. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with unkempt hair and a look that seemed awkward. At first, he didn't seem threatening, just someone looking for assistance. "Do you know where I can find the flour?" he asked, holding an empty basket. His voice was soft, but his eyes, they were too intense, staring a little too hard. "Oh yeah, it's in aisle 6, I replied, pointing down the row. "It's on the bottom shelf, near the baking supplies." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks. I'm terrible at finding things in these places." I laughed nervously, turning back to my apples, thinking that would be the end of it. People ask for help all the time, right? No big deal. I was being paranoid. I was sure of it. But a few minutes later, as I turned into the cereal aisle, there he was again. His basket was still empty, and he wasn't even looking at the shelves, just me. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I told myself it was a coincidence. The store isn't that big, right? Of course, we'd run into each other again. Still, I hurried through the aisle, grabbing the first box of cereal I saw and tossing it into my basket without even checking what it was. As I moved on to the dairy section, my thoughts began to spiral. There was something wrong with this guy, but I didn't want to overreact. He hadn't done anything yet, but why was he still carrying an empty basket? And why did he keep showing up in the same aisles as me? I reached for a carton of milk, trying to push the unease away, when I felt that prickling sensation again. You know when you know someone is watching you? It was like that, like his eyes were burning holes into my back. I turned slowly, and there he was, just a few feet away, staring. Now, my heart was racing. Something was definitely off. He was watching me, and he wasn't even pretending to shop anymore. My mind raced with all the true crime stories I'd ever heard. Stalkers, kidnappers, people who vanish in the most normal places, like grocery stores. I started to move quicker, turning into the next aisle, but I could hear his footsteps behind me. My breath hitched in my throat. He was following me now, and it wasn't subtle. My hand gripped the handle of my basket tighter as I turned into the next aisle, but there he was again, as if he'd been waiting for me. I nearly dropped my basket. I felt a wave of panic flood my system. I needed to get out. Now, I walked briskly toward the front, but the only open checkout line was packed with people. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweaty as I looked behind me. He was standing at the end of an empty aisle, still watching me, that same empty basket in his hand. I had two choices: stand there in line, trapped, or leave my basket and get out of the store. My brain screamed for me to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I didn't want to make a scene, but at the same time, every nerve in my body was telling me this man was dangerous. The line moved agonizingly slow. I could feel the panic crawling up my throat. When I turned to check again, he was gone. My heart dropped. Where was he now? I tried to focus on the checkout, fumbling to hand over my items to the cashier. But when I glanced at my car outside through the rain, I saw him. He was standing next to it. How did he get there so fast? He wasn't looking at me now, just standing by my car, as if waiting for me. Panic gripped my entire body. The second the cashier handed me my receipt, I grabbed my bags and made a beeline for the door. The rain hit me hard as I sprinted toward my car, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key into the lock. I could feel him watching me. Closer now. My keys slipped from my hand and hit the wet pavement. I cursed under my breath, bending down to grab them, when I heard his voice, low and closer than ever. "You're leaving so soon?" I froze. His voice was different now, colder, more sinister. I didn't dare look up, but I could hear his footsteps moving toward me, slow, deliberate. "I just need your help." "Again," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, so close I could feel his breath. I stood up quickly, keys in hand, and fumbled to unlock the door. I could see his reflection in the window, his face twisted into a smile that wasn't friendly anymore. It was something else, something dark. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys again. His fingers brushed the back of my neck, and my blood ran cold. "I've been watching you for a while," he whispered, too close to my ear. "You always shop here on Wednesday nights. Around this time." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a coincidence. He'd been watching me for who knows how long. With a surge of adrenaline, I snatched my keys off the ground, flung the door open, and jumped inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My heart was racing, my hands trembling as I fumbled to start the car. I could still see him through the rain, standing there, smiling, like he knew something I didn't. I sped out of the parking lot like my life depended on it, my heart still thundering in my chest. The rain hit the windshield in angry bursts, but I barely noticed. My mind was in overdrive, trying to process what had just happened, but it was too much, too bizarre. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me, blurred by the rain. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was over. I was safe now. He hadn't followed me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. My skin crawled, and I couldn't stop glancing into the dark corners of the road as I drove, every shadow looking like it could hide him. Who the hell was he? How long had he been watching me? His voice echoed in my mind. "You always shop here on Wednesday nights." I felt sick. How many Wednesday nights had I seen him without noticing? How long had he been lurking, silently planning? I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, the panic resurfacing. I needed to get home. I needed to lock the doors, close the blinds, and hide. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, letting the rain pound against the car. My body was still buzzing with adrenaline, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath. It was stupid, but I didn't want to get out. The thought of stepping out of the car into the open made my skin prickle with fear. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. He wasn't here. There was no way he could have followed me, right? But then I saw it. There, sitting on my front porch, was the basket. The one he'd been carrying all night. My stomach dropped like a stone. How was it here? I hadn't seen him follow me. He hadn't left the store. I'd been sure of it. But there it was, like a twisted reminder that he had followed me. Or worse, maybe he'd already been here, watching me, even before I got home. I blinked, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me, but the basket didn't disappear. My breath hitched as I squinted through the rain. There was something else in the basket now. A folded note, the paper stained with raindrops. For a moment, I couldn't move. The fear gripped me so tightly that I felt paralyzed. Then, slowly, my hand reached for the car door handle, trembling as I opened it. The sound of the rain was deafening as I stepped out, my shoes splashing against the wet ground. Each step toward the porch felt heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing shallow as I crouched down to look at the note. My fingers shook as I picked it up, unfolding it carefully. "I'll see you next Wednesday." I dropped the note, stumbling back. My pulse spiked again, and I could barely breathe. He was still watching me. Maybe he had followed me after all, hidden in the shadows while I thought I was safe. My mind raced, imagining him standing somewhere nearby, watching me even now. I didn't think. I just ran inside, slamming the door behind me, locking it, bolting it, and then pushing a chair under the knob for good measure. I checked the windows, pulling the curtains tight, and turned off all the lights in the house. Maybe if he thought no one was home, he'd leave me alone. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't stop him. I retreated to the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The house felt too big, too quiet, like the walls were closing in on me. I grabbed my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed 911, but my heart sank when I saw there was no signal. The storm must have knocked it out. "Shit," I muttered, pacing back and forth. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. What if he was already outside, watching through the windows? What if he'd been here before, scoping out my house? What if this wasn't the first time? The sound of the wind howling outside sent a chill down my spine. I knew I needed to stay calm, but the silence was suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner, as if expecting him to step out from the darkness. And then, a knock. My blood ran cold. It was soft, almost tentative, but unmistakable. A light knock on the front door. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. For a long, tense moment, I stood completely still, barely breathing, listening. Another knock, ... I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. My whole body was shaking now. I knew it was him. It had to be. But how had he gotten here? Had he been waiting outside the entire time? My feet moved before my brain could catch up, and I found myself in the hallway, staring at the front door. I could see the silhouette of someone standing on the other side through the thin curtain that covered the window. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall, my breath shallow and fast. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. "I know you're in there," his voice called from the other side. I swallowed the lump in my throat, every muscle in my body tensing. "I just need to talk to you. You didn't finish helping me earlier." The words felt like a knife slicing through the silence. How was he this calm? This casual? Like this was some kind of normal interaction. "I'll be back next week if you don't answer now." He said it so lightly, like it was a promise. And that's when I knew this wouldn't stop, not unless I made it stop. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I shouted, "Go away. I'm calling the police." There was a long silence, so long that I started to wonder if he'd actually left. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking away from the door. My knees buckled, and I slid down the wall, gasping for air. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. I forced myself to stand, to move to the window, and peered outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the street was empty. No sign of him. Maybe he really had left? But then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. One new message from an unknown number. You won't always see me, but I'll always see you. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. He was still watching. He could be anywhere, at any time. My stomach churned with dread, and I knew deep down this was only the beginning. Next Wednesday couldn't come soon enough.